fight fans, and welcome to Rugged Rob's Combat Corner, where combat is always king. I'm your host, the one and only Rugged Rob, and I'd like to welcome you to another podcast, the Rugged Rob's Combat Corner podcast. And today I have a very special guest, probably the first that came with a suit. This is John Elmore. Now, John is a former Golden Gloves fighter. He's an attorney, and he is also an official, a USA boxing official in the amateurs here in Western New York. How you doing today?
Good afternoon, Rob, and thanks for having me here today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I always like to invite the fight family out because we're a very tight-knit family, and that goes without saying. And you're a very important part of it. Now, let's start this conversation with your background in boxing. You started out in an amateur. Now tell me, where you from originally and how you got started in boxing?
Sure. Bob, I'm originally from Olean, New York, and I was a member of the Southern Tier Boxing Club. There was a guy by the name of Larry Twitty. He was a national champion in the early 1960s, and he ended up going to Olean, and he was a director at the YMCA. And so at the Y, guys would play basketball, and at the end of the day, he'd take everybody up to the mat room and rough them up a little bit and teach us how to box.
Okay.
And him and a guy by the name of Jojo Red Eye from Salamanca they started the Southern Tier Boxing Club.
Okay.
And so I fought amateurs from 1973 until 1972 to 71, 3 years. And I fought in the Golden Gloves in 1973.
Okay.
I made it to semifinals as an amateur. But our boxing club wasn't structured like a lot of the other clubs around the country. You know, we had the guys would go upstairs, 2 or 3 times a week after playing basketball. We'd learn how to box, and if there was a show in Buffalo or Niagara Falls or Ithaca or Rochester, he'd get 7 or 8 guys that had been in the gym, and we'd take a road trip and fight on those shows. And then we also had a few shows on the reservation in Salamanca and at Olean High School. And Larry Twitty was just such a great guy, a great influence on all of us. Didn't have a lot of equipment. He showed up at the Y. He had 2 sets of boxing gloves, 2 sets of headgear. He had a jar that had scope in it with mouthpieces in it, and bought his own heavy bag. And
hardcore.
And that was all the equipment. But we'd come to Buffalo, and we'd go to Westminster, we'd go to Boys Town, and some of those relationships I still have. I mean, that's how I met Don Simpkins at 13 years old, and fought on some of his shows at St. Martin's. I remember the first show.
Not to cut you off, Don Simpkins was doing shows when you were 13?
1971. I fought on his show, man. And when we went up to St. Martin's, he was at a real rough community center. They had more fights outside the ring than they did in the ring. It was kind of like that. So, but Larry was a one-man show. We had a couple of shows in Olean. He built the ring. He promoted the show.
Okay.
He brought all the fighters in, worked our corners, and he also fought in the show. I mean, talk about a one-man show. Unfortunately, when he was, I think when I was about 17 or 18, he contracted Hodgkin's disease and passed away. But he was just a great influence on so many of us young men at 13, 14, 15, 16 years old down in Olean, and he brought boxing to the Southern Tier. I mean, our club consisted of guys from the Y, some guys from Salamanca on the reservation, and then back then, the division from youth had a facility in Great Valley, New York, and on Saturdays, those guys would come down to Olean and train with us as well. I can remember the 1973 Golden Gloves. We had quite a few entrants in the gloves there. One of our members, Marky Jimerson, who's Nate Jimerson's father.
Right.
Yeah, he fought in the only all Native American heavyweight championship. It was him fighting a 360-pound Tuscaroran Native American for the heavyweight title back in '73.
Now, back in the '70s, were the gloves in Buffalo at the time?
The Golden Gloves were in Buffalo. They were sponsored by the Courier Express, and they were in the auditorium, and they were much different then. The auditorium would be packed with 10,000 people. Back in those days, you could smoke in the aud, and I can remember going to the aud when the butterflies they start getting in your stomach. It's because when you smell that cigar smoke, the guys at the ringside with the big old stogies, it's getting close to fight time.
Okay.
But and then what else was different is that the Canadians were allowed to fight in the Golden Gloves. So you had teams from Toronto, from Montreal, and from Hamilton, Ontario, and so they were very, very, very competitive. And it was, even in Buffalo, there were more club teams back then. You had teams from South Buffalo, North Buffalo, the West Side, Niagara Falls, and we had our small contingent of guys down in the Southern Tier, the Southern Tier Boxing Club.
Well, with the popularity of boxing back in the 70s, just moving ahead a little bit, where do you think we missed a step as far as boxing and its popularity? I ask everyone that question.
I think sports as a whole has changed. I mean, in the 70s, number one, you didn't play hockey in high school. You didn't have soccer in high school. You didn't have all the travel teams in sports where people played basketball year-round like they do now. And then I think things changed in the pros. If you look professionally now, you have so many more National Football League teams than you had in the 70s. And so, in the 70s, if a big guy didn't make it to the NFL, then the odds were he was going to be a fighter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the sports have you compete for athletes.
Yeah.
And now that you have more sports and the NFL has gained popularity, the NBA has gained popularity. There's a lot of money and sponsorship that comes with those two sports alone.
Right.
Then you got soccer, you got hockey, you got lacrosse. So, we might have lost a step, but I think boxing slowly but surely is coming back. I don't think we could really change the culture as it is in the pros, but we need to start from the base, amateur boxing. So that's why I try to shine on those guys coming up so they can stick with it and know that there is a future in this game without, one, getting hurt too much or taking too much damage, and two, you can make a living at it if you do it smart.
You can make a living at it. My focus as a volunteer official, and I also volunteer a couple of nights a week at Flair with the Bomb Squad.
Now, is it still Flair? I heard Flair.
Well, the Flair, they're not associated with Flair, but I guess that's what I call the center, the Flair Center.
Right.
But the Bomb Squad, and that's a program that you were one of the founders of.
Yes,
and
yes,
so
I was.
I'll volunteer my services there. 2 nights a week and working with the young men and the young kids there. But my focus is not to turn kids into professionals, but to lure them into the gym and keep them in the gym and learn life skills, learn discipline, learn how to focus, learn that there's a perspective that you should have with education and athletics and staying off the street.
Now, what do you think boxing shows a child or a young man or a young woman that other sports don't show them?
Well, most important thing, I think boxing requires more discipline than any other sport, and it requires more focus than any other sport, okay? If you're not focused in boxing, what happens? You get knocked out.
You get hurt, yeah.
You get hurt.
Yeah.
And if you're not disciplined, you're going to get hurt. And one of the things that you learn is that if you cheat in boxing and you're not training, the only person that you're hurting is yourself.
And it shows.
And you can't blame a teammate.
Right.
You can't blame your coach because you haven't been in the gym. So I think there's a lot of lessons and life skills that I've learned as a young person that was instilled in me by my trainers, and that I use as an adult, and that I use it as a lawyer today, and then I try to instill some of those skills into the young people.
Now, what is boxing? You're 3 years in the game, fighting as an amateur. What has that taught you that you carry through in your adult life?
Well, number one, I think it's always given me a bit of confidence, a little bit of edge. When you're 13, 14, 16, and you're in the gym and you win a few fights, no one is ever going to pick on you.
Right.
And I'm not a bully. I would stick up for somebody, but I'm not a bully. But it's always given me a certain amount of confidence. Even in the courtroom. I feel confidence, a certain way that I can stand, a certain way that I can talk, look somebody in the eye, and be a winner.
Well, if you can fight, you seldom have to fight.
That's right.
And especially if everybody else know you can fight.
That's right.
You don't have to fight much. Well, let's move forward. We went over your amateur career. Then you finish high school. You go to college. Now, in what point in your life you say, I'm going to be an attorney?
Yeah. I always wanted to be a lawyer, and probably if it wasn't for sports, I may not have made it to college. I'm the first generation person in my family to go to college, but I was, in addition to the boxing, I ran track, I played basketball, I graduated only in high school. I'm on the Athletic Wall of Fame, as well as the Academic Wall of Fame, and that's why I think it's important to put academics and athletics in the proper perspective.
You was the man in high school.
You need both. It's a small community, but I was all right. I was the fastest quarter miler out of 88 public high schools in Western New York.
Okay, so you ran the 400.
I ran the 400. I even against your alma mater, Edinburgh.
Oh, you ran against Edinburgh?
Yeah, Mansfield State. We're in the Pennsylvania Athletic Conference.
Oh, you played for Mansfield.
That's correct.
Okay, we got to cut this interview because we're bitter rivals now.
That's right. We were bitter rivals with Edinburgh. That's right.
Mansfield.
Yes.